You're listening to a BGE podcast.
Friends and family gather round and fire up the barbecue. Let the smoke waft and float, that's what we're gonna do. You can't deny there's nothing like friends and family and food. Don't sit still, pull out your grill, we're gonna have a barbecue.
How do I get that perfect tender bite of my favorite steak every time? Man, isn't that the million-dollar question everybody is wanting to know? And on today's episode of the Blind Grilling Experience, that's what we're talking about.
'Cause if you're looking, you ain't cooking, fire up the barbecue. Fire up the barbecue.
Welcome back, folks. My name is Chris Peltz. I am the most interesting griller in the world. And today we've got a great episode for you because we're going to be answering that very question. Everyone wants to know how to get that perfect tender bite of your favorite steak every time. Because I'm going to tell you, anyone can get lucky and hit it every once in a while. But that consistency, that's what people are looking for. You know, they're tired of paying all these astronomical prices at restaurants. And well, as far as that goes, prices are getting pretty high in the grocery stores and meat markets themselves. But still, everyone wants to fire up the grills. I hope you guys have been having a great summer so far. Been firing up the grills and throwing on some burger steaks and smoking some briskets and pork butts and ribs and all those wonderful goodies. But today we are focusing in on the steaks. So we're going to talk about the beef, and I want to, help you to have a little bit more consistency in your cooks and walk through some tips and tricks on making sure that you have the best and most tender bite every single time. And so let's get into this. First of all, I want to talk about the grades of beef. Now, we're not going to get into the wild aspects of Wagyu beef and Kobe beef and all of that. We're going to stick with the three main things that you're going to find just about anywhere and everywhere you go to buy your beef. While I do not recommend buying your meat at Walmart, I know some folks don't necessarily always have a choice, right? That's pretty much what they have, and that's where they're going to get it. And if it is, it is. But if you can go to a meat market or a store that has a really good meat counter, where you can talk to a butcher or someone who can pull out and really explain the marbling, tell you what something looks like, or you can get things cut to a specific thickness that you like. That's the kind of markets that I really recommend you go to get your steaks. If you're really wanting to be as consistent as possible and have the best experience possible, that's really the best way to do it. I know it's not always possible, but again, I'm just trying to help you out here. It may cost a little bit more, but that's where you're going to get into, that fallacy in a way that, you have to have prime and never get select. That's not always true. That's not always true, especially if you're getting good quality meat at a quality market and meat counter. There's going to be some really good gems of select cuts that you can find and really be able to enjoy at a much lower price point. But very quickly, the difference, right? Let's talk about that for just a minute. Prime is going to be your top of the line. Again, we're not getting into Wagyu, but prime. So without getting into that, prime is going to be your top of the line. That's going to have your most marbling. It's going to be the most flavorful, and generally it comes from a much younger cow, and so it's going to be a lot more tender overall. Probably the most popular grade is going to be your choice. Choice is going to be found just about everywhere, and that's what most people are going to be purchasing. First of all, because when you jump to prime, the price goes way up. I mean, it's terrible, really, the difference between prime and choice. Select is going to be cheaper than your choice, but usually not so much cheaper that it's really not worth getting the choice. So choice is probably where everyone is going to go. If you're at a really good meat market, you got a meat counter, you get to know, the butcher or the head of the meat counter there, they can usually recommend to you when they've got some cuts that are graded as select but look really good. And so that's worth asking about. For example, where we go here in Springfield, Missouri, at Harder House on Eastgate Avenue, they've got a really good meat counter, and they'll have whole beef tenderloins, and sometimes they'll even have the filet mignons, bacon wrapped filet mignons, and that's what they're doing. They're cutting it from those whole beef tenderloins that are select, and they'll have those on sale, and the people look at these beef tenderloins, or they'll look at the fillets that they'll have there, and they'll be $4 or $5, for either a 6 or 8 ounce filet mignon, and they're great, right? They're not going to be as flavorful as a prime or a choice. They're going to be a whole lot cheaper, and you can season them up well, but they can still be tender. And that's kind of that misnomer that people think if you get select, it's just going to be tough. And that isn't always the case. But for all intensive purposes, let's plan on getting a choice cut. But the little tips and tricks we're going to walk through are going to be the same regardless. Even if you get prime or a select, all of this is going to work the same and get you results that I think you're going to enjoy and get you some consistent results as well. Obviously, there's different types of steaks, different cuts, and everyone has their choice of what they prefer. Some people really like that fat that runs through a nice thick ribeye. Other people want something a little bit more lean, like a sirloin or that filet. And so, it's going to really depend on preference when it comes to that. But again, whether you're getting a New York or Kansas City strip, a porterhouse, that filet, or that ribeye, again, what we're going to be talking about is going to work for all of these cuts of steak to get you those tender bites. Keeping in mind, a porterhouse is basically your strip steak and your filet, all together still, right? It's all together. It hasn't been separated, and so when it's cut, off the cow, when it's butchered, when they're cutting a porterhouse, it's doing a cross section of that tenderloin and of that strip. And so, that's in essence what the porterhouse is. So you get the best of both worlds there. A lot of folks really like that ribeye for that fat that they can render down and get that nice, just melt in the mouth, just real juicy strip of fat. Some folks don't like that. I do. I like it, but, some folks just would rather not mess with that at all. But regardless of what your favorite cut of steak is, there's a few things that we're going to recommend that you do, and this is going to be absolutely key in making sure you have the most tender and perfect bite every single time. Now, before you go out and get a steak and then you start looking for all the tools that we're going to talk about, first of all, I want to point out that this can be done either inside on a stovetop and in the oven, or it can be done on a grill. You can do these cooks in either place. So if you don't have a grill, you're having to resort to cooking inside on a stovetop and in the oven, this will work. If you're fortunate enough to have a grill, a charcoal grill is preferred. This is going to work. Now, if you'll recall last week we talked about the reverse sear and what the reverse sear is all about. And that's going to be one of those methods, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves here. Just let's slow down and back up. So you get the cut of steak that you want, right? I do recommend getting, as thick as you can. You want 1.5 inches, if at all possible. Sometimes they're only going to be about 1 inch thick. That's all right. You're going to want really nice marbling. And if you're blind or visually impaired, you got somebody at the meat counter that can tell you, how it looks, if they can see the marbling and if it looks really good, they can usually make a solid recommendation. And so that's what you're going to go with. You're going to get that. You're going to get home. And when you get home, unless you plan on cooking it right away, you're going to go ahead and you're going to put it in your refrigerator and keep it cool. Now, before you cook, let's say you're getting ready to go out and fire up your grill. You're going to pull that steak out and you're going to set it on the counter at room temperature. And this is something that's kind of a misnomer in a lot of the videos and a lot of the articles that you're going to read and some recommendations that are made. And I've even said it this way, that that it's best to pull out your steak and let it set out and bring it up to room temperature. That's kind of a misleading, because you're not bringing the meat in and of itself up to room temperature. That's not what you're doing, right? So let's say your house is sitting at 75 degrees or maybe even 72 degrees. You're not bringing that meat up to 72 degrees from your refrigerator before you cook it. You're setting it out at room temperature. But even if you let it set out for an hour, it's probably going to come up about 5 to 6 degrees, right? So if it's setting at, 38 degrees in your fridge, it may come up to, 45 degrees. Now, it makes a big difference when it comes to just pulling it out of the fridge, seasoning it up, and throwing it on the grill, as opposed to setting it out for an hour on the counter and letting it set at room temperature. It does make a difference, and here's why. What you're going to find, and what some of these guys who have really dived into the science and really paid attention and measuring the temperatures and all of that, what they find is that it's going to cook more evenly all the way through. And that's going to help you to get the most tender bite of your favorite steak every single time, right? Is having it cooked thoroughly, exactly the same way, the same doneness all the way through. What happens if you just pull it straight out of the fridge and throw it on the grill? It doesn't always work that way, because you get certain aspects of it that are cooking a little faster, that are heating up a little faster than others. And if you're able to let it set out for an hour and kind of rest before you cook it, it doesn't come to room temperature, but it does rise a little bit and kind of even out. And then it is going to cook a lot more even throughout the cut of steak. And that's going to be very key in helping you to have a consistent bite every time on that particular piece of steak. So when they talk about bringing it to room temperature, it's not that you need to leave it out for 3 or 4 hours. You don't want to do that, right? Hour and a half, sometimes 30 minutes is fine. But take it out of the fridge, no less than 30 minutes before you're going to throw it on the grill and let it rest. If you can let it set out at least 30 minutes before you season it up, and then let it set out another 30 minutes, let that season kind of work in, that's even better. That's another tip, right? So we're not going to talk about the seasonings. You can pick your favorite seasoning, the favorite flavor that you like as far as that is concerned. But let the steak set out for 30 minutes. Then you're going to season it up with your favorite seasoning and let it set for another 30 minutes at room temperature. and let that seasoning work. Let that salt and that pepper, it'll kind of draw out some of that moisture, and that salt will dissolve and it'll go right back into that steak. And it'll start to kind of get this little sheen to it. It's awesome. It works, and it's a great tip to not only having consistency, but knowing that you're going to get the best bite every time. One tool that you want to have before you run out and get all this going, you want to have a thermometer, a meat probe. One that you can leave in is ideal, first and foremost, right? And of course, an instant read is always great as well. If you can have a talking instant read for those who are blind or visually impaired, you can go to theblindkitchen.com. Deborah Erickson is the owner of that store, and theblindkitchen.com. She's done a great job putting together a lot of blind and visually impaired friendly items to help you with cooks in the kitchen and at the grill. And a talking thermometer is key. She's got a great one on her website, and there are some others that are out there. ThermoWorks has a good talking thermometer. Ryzen has a talking thermometer. You can go to a lot of the blind-friendly, sites and pick up a talking thermometer online. But I do recommend you have one. There are some that are leave-in that are wireless, such as the Meter, MEATER. We did a whole episode, I think, on the Meter Plus leave-in wireless meat probe. I want to stress this now. Do not get the Meter Block. The Meter Block is completely inaccessible at this point. Don't get it. Do not get the Meter Block. And if it ever becomes accessible, I will do my best to let folks know, but at this point, it is not accessible. But the single Meter Plus is absolutely and completely accessible for the blind and visually impaired. If you can download an app on your phone, you're able to pair it and use the Meter Plus single probe with your iPhone and or Android, and it works great, and it's accessible, and you can keep track of the meat, whether it's in the oven or on the grill. You're able to keep track of the internal temperature of your meat. And what's cool about the Meter Plus is not only does it have the meat probe at one end, at the other end, it's got an ambient temperature, so you can also keep track of your grill temp or your oven temp, and it'll register that for you as well. So the Meter Plus, MEATER Plus single probe, that is a great option for folks. A little bit more expensive than some of the talking thermometers, instant read thermometers, but with the Meter Plus, you're able to leave it in and just monitor it rather than poking your steak with a instant read every once in a while to check the temperature. So that's a key product that I really highly recommend that you have if you want to be consistent. I know a lot of folks talk about the feel and using your thumb and as you go down your thumb and how soft or how firm it gets, and people can talk about with steaks. And some folks get really good at that, but there's going to be some inconsistencies there. And so, keeping track of the internal temp is the absolute best way to go, right? I'm answering the question, what's the best way, to do this and do it consistently, and that's it. That's with being able to monitor the internal temp of the steak itself. So you got your grill, or you've got, let's say a cast iron skillet that you're going to be using inside on your stovetop or your oven. And you've got a big, nice charcoal grill, and you get it fired up and you're bringing it to temp to cook. You've got your steak, whatever cut you like. It's set out for 30 minutes. You've seasoned it up and let it set for another 30 minutes. And now you're ready to put it on the grill. And what I recommend is what's referred to as the reverse sear. Okay. And that is, you want to have, let's say if you're doing it inside, you want your oven at 250 to 275. If you're doing it on a grill, same thing, 250 to 275. That's how hot you want to get your grill. It's not very hot, but this is the way to get the best results and consistent results every single time. And so you're going to have that real low temp. You're going to put your steaks out there. You're going to put a probe, if you got it, you're going to put a probe in it, and you're going to bring that steak up to the temp that you want. Some people like it a little bit more done. Some people like it a little bit more rare than a medium rare. But right around that 120 to 128 internal temperature, we're talking Fahrenheit, 120 to 128 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, there are certain preferences here. You can go a little lower. You can go a little bit higher on that. I wouldn't go much, but that's going to be a good range for folks. Because we're not done cooking it yet, right? This isn't the end game here. Between that 120 and 128 is what you're doing before you're going to put a good sear on it. And also, the steak is going to have some carryover temp, so it's going to continue to rise, close to 5 degrees. And so, if you're looking for that, 133, 134 internal temp, you're going to put it in your oven or on your grill and bring that internal temp up to about 128 degrees. You want it less than that. Basically, you're shooting for about 5 degrees less than what you want. And that's when you're going to take it out of the grill or out of the oven. And now what you're going to do is you're going to get a really hot service, whether it's getting the vents open on your grill and getting that grill nice and hot up, 500, 600 degrees, or turning your oven up to 450, 500 degrees, or rather getting your stovetop. This is where if you're inside, you're going to do it on the stovetop. After you've cooked it in the oven and you've gotten that temperature between that 120, 128, now you're going to get a skillet, put a little bit of butter in it, and you're going to get it screaming hot on the stovetop. And then you're going to place them steaks on that hot cast iron, and you're going to sear it for about a minute on each side. And that's it. You're going to pull it off. You're going to let it rest for about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's ready to serve. It's ready to slice into, and it's ready to serve. And the same with the grill, right? If you're outside on the grill, you've brought it up to that 120 to 128 internal temp. Again, there can be some variations depending on how you like your steak. If you like it a little bit more done or a little bit less done, you can adjust your temperatures there. But that's where I would recommend you start, right? So if you want to go to 125, split it in the middle there, and then take it off the grill and then get your grill really hot. Or you can then bring it inside and, sear it on the cast iron on the stovetop, or if you have a griddle outside, sear it there. Or just get your grill hot and sear it right there on the grill over the coals. That's really the beginning here, right? That's the beginning process of getting the best, most tender bite of steak you can possibly get. But before you think, all right, it's done, it's going to work every single time, hold on. There's another little tip that you need to know. KickashBasket.com for all your grilling accessory needs, whether you're looking for some heat-resistant gloves to pull out those hot pans and cast iron skillets from your grill or oven, or you're looking for that charcoal management with their basket that improves airflow and the Kick Ash can to catch all those ashes and make for easy cleanup, check out KickashBasket.com. Shake that ash and light that fire. Go to kickashbasket.com and tell them Blind Grilling sent you. All right, folks, there's another little thing that we need to talk about when it comes to the steaks, when it comes to making sure the bites are tender. First of all, we talked about resting it for about 5 to 10 minutes. This is going to be absolutely key. When and you can think about this in all kinds of ways, right? When when you're cooking meat, it kind of draws up. You've seen that probably with burgers. You start out with this huge monster burger patty, and as you cook it, it shrinks up, and sometimes with steaks, there's some movement as they're getting heated up. And as you're cooking it, there's going to be some movement of those fibers. And a lot of that has to do with the moisture content of the steak. As that fat renders down and that moisture kind of draws into the middle of that steak, when you let it rest, you pull it off the heat, what begins to happen is that moisture redistributes throughout the steak. And that's key to let that happen, right, for the best results. Again, regardless of what you've seasoned it with, this is one of those keys. Letting it rest and let that moisture redistribute back throughout the steak, so giving it that 5 to 10 minutes to rest. And sometimes when it's resting, you can put a little tint of foil over it. And not only that, but you might put a little pat of butter right on top of it while it's resting. Let that butter melt and just go and, permeate throughout that steak as it rests. That not only can be awesome for flavor, you can, make some kind of compound butter with some herbs and, and just make a really nice buttery glaze you can put on your steak as well. But here's the next key, and this is probably one of the most difficult for those who are blind or visually impaired, and that's going to be how the steak is cut. We talk about this with brisket. We talk about this with tri-tips and larger cuts of meat. You can do everything right, and that steak can be sitting there, and you can, and two people can have the exact same steak. One person can cut it one way, and it be awesome and tender every time, every bite. Another person could have that same steak, cut it a different way, and it can be the chewiest and toughest piece of meat they've ever put in their mouth. And you're like, what? How is that even possible? Well, you need to learn how to cut against the grain. And again, this is something that's really difficult when it comes to steaks. And depending on the steak, there's a few ways that you can kind of tell with this. Your strip steaks, for example. With your strip steaks, usually the muscle fibers are running long ways. They're running from one end to the other. So it's going to be kind of long and a little bit more narrow. And so you're going to cut, so let's say you got it going long ways left to right. So you cut, in front of you across those fibers, across that grain, right? That's going to help you get some tender bites of meat. Because if you cut with those fibers, with that grain, basically you've got these long strips of fiber, and it just makes the meat chewy. Now, I know the question is going to be, well, how do I tell? How do I know on every cut of meat? And, sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes you got to cut a piece off and bite into it and find out. Or if you start to tear it, or maybe you cut a little piece and then you go to tear that piece, you can then, if you go to tear it, it's going to tear in the direction of the grains, kind of like tearing, a piece of paper or cardboard or something. Sometimes wood, if you picture a piece of wood, if you've seen that and you've seen the grain of wood that runs, up along a board, if you cut along that grain, it's called a rip cut, or you can do a cross cut. You want to do a cross cut, right? Otherwise, those long fibers are still together and it just makes for chewy meat. And so if you go to rip or tear the meat a little bit, it'll begin to tear along the fibers, right? Along the grain. And so however it tears, you want to go across that and let it just kind of naturally tell you. Again, sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to tell. But if you can cut it across the grain, you're going to find yourself with some extremely tender cuts of meat. And I think you're going to have great success with that. we're talking medium rare temperatures that I've given. Some folks like it a little bit more done. If that's the case, you like it a little bit more done, there's a fine line before going from tender to tough when it comes to, overcooking your steak. So you want to be really careful. And if you can keep from going over that 140 to 145, for those who want it done as possible, the better they're going to enjoy it. But for those who like it a little bit more rare, a lot of folks, they talk about, oh man, how do you like your steaks? Oh, knock off the horns and the hooves and walk it through the kitchen. All right. And that's just about where I'm at. That's what I like. Just knock off the horns and hooves, walk it through the kitchen. Just make sure it isn't mooing and I'm good. Right. And so, folks have different tastes, different things that they like. Textures change with the meat the longer you cook it. And so, those are a few tips and tricks that I wanted to give to you guys today on the podcast. So if you're firing up those grills, you're getting ready to cook some steaks, don't be afraid to ask the butcher. Ask the guy at the meat counter, about the marbling and to pick one that looks the best, right? And sometimes they'll look at what's in the what's there at the counter. And I've had some guys be like, well, I'll tell you what, hold on just a second. I'm going to go in the back and see if we got anything that looks a little bit better. Sometimes you get some really good guys at those meat counters and they're going to look out for you and they're going to find you the best cut they can possibly find, even if that means going into the back and find another cut that's not up in at the counter at that point in time. But ask for the best looking, the best marbling, choice if at all possible. Don't be afraid of those selects. You may have to season a little bit more to get that flavor, but if you do that reverse sear method, then you're going to have some tender meat, even on a select cut. Now, before we go, though, I do want to talk about this on an inside cook. If you have a grill, I do recommend always doing the reverse sear, low and slow, and then putting the sear on at the end. But let's say you don't have a grill and you want some wonderful results inside. It's possible. And in this case, we're going to do a sear and then finish it off in the oven. You're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. You're going to get a cast iron skillet if at all possible. You're going to get that skillet hot on the stovetop with a little bit of butter in there. And once that is hot, you're going to, and you got your steak seasoned up. You've gone through the process, letting it set out, let's say 30 minutes, the seasoning it, letting it set another 30 minutes. You're preheated your oven to 350, and now you're at your stovetop. You're going to put those steaks down on that cast iron skillet for about a minute and a half each side. So put them down, let them sear for a minute and a half. You're going to then flip them to the other side for a minute and a half. And once that minute and a half is over, you're going to take that skillet, right? Get a nice heat-resistant glove and or a pot holder or something. Grab that skillet and slide that cast iron skillet into the oven. And if you have that leave-in thermometer like that meter plus, you're going to stick it in the meat and you're going to monitor the temp until it gets to about, within 5 to 3 degrees of your desired temp. Then you're going to take it out, put it on a plate, tent it, and let it rest for 5 to 10 minutes. And that's the best method, I think, for inside. You can do the reverse sear inside, but I like doing it inside where I do the sear first in the skillet and then stick it in the oven to finish it off, put a meat probe in it, and bring it up to my desired temp. And I think with that and a good meat probe that you can leave in and monitor the temperature of the meat, you're going to have good, consistent cooks every time. And I think you're going to like it. In fact, I'd love for you to email us and tell me about it. blindgrilling@gmail.com. BlindGrillingPodcast@gmail.com is our email address, folks. We want to hear from you. We appreciate everybody who writes in, who asks us the questions. Share out the podcast as well.
Friends and family gather round and fire.
And again, remember, blindgrilling@gmail.com. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got lots of cooks there, some videos and walkthroughs when it comes to that. Like that inside steak method. We got rib cooks and other things there as well. youtube.com/blindgrilling. Go to our Instagram @blindgrilling and find us on Facebook @blindgrilling. And of course, check out the Facebook group Blind Grilling Experience. Request to join. We'd love to have you. Share some of your cooks there as well. Remember, if you're looking, folks, you ain't cooking.
'Cause if you're looking, you ain't cooking. Fire up the barbecue. Fire up the barbecue.